The recent anti-Semitic threats that have been written on the famous rock at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville are terrifying and horrifying. Now twice in the last 2 weeks has this campus focal point been defaced with hateful messages about Jews, causing anger and fear among our Jewish students and all those individuals who define this sort of prejudice as an assault on the humanity of decent people. JCP in Memphis has led the way in organizing all the Tennessee Jewish federations to demand that the university's administration speak out more strongly against these acts and to define this vandalism as completely unwelcome at UTK, and to do much more to support the school's Jewish students. It seems that their message has been taken seriously, but the situation reveals an infection in the hearts and minds of some in the community, an infection for which we have yet to find a lasting cure. This rock and the ugliness for which it has served as a canvas call us to linger on all the seemingly immovable difficulties that we face as human beings and as a community. That famous idiom, caught between a rock and a hard place, illustrates a situation in which it feels impossible to find relief because we are not strong enough to move through the oppressive forces around us, because we are trapped. So what do we do when we find ourselves with no comfort from the difficult situations in our lives, whether blatant anti-Semitism or catastrophic medical diagnoses or crumbling relationships or any number of hard places through which we all pass? Our ancestor and namesake Jacob also finds himself caught between a rock and a hard place in this week's Torah portion. Jacob flees his home, such a hard place, after having found himself unwelcome there through acts of his own choice. And he must spend his first night alone with his head on a rock. Unsure of where to turn, he goes to sleep. And of course, Jacob famously has an experience in this dark and insecure moment in his life. He dreams of a ladder with angels ascending and descending, in which God speaks to him. And then he wakes up and has a revelation. He says, and we all remember what he says, God is in this place, and I did not know it. And he vows to return to this place one day, and he sanctifies this rock, and it is the first day of the rest of his life. This week I have pondered what we might learn from Jacob when he is caught between his rock and hard place. And I believe his actions do offer us a set of behaviors that might be centering as we confront our own. Firstly, Jacob sleeps on it, literally. And this is what God wants. The Midrash indicates that this darkness, this night that comes upon Jacob, is no typical gradual setting of the sun. It is rather God darkening the sky so that Jacob will have to stop traveling, lay down, and go to sleep and breathe. And sometimes this is what we all need as well. It is why we have Shabbat. And it is even ours to claim on other days. Sometimes we lay our heads down on those rocks and admit that we can make no more progress today, but tomorrow is another day. Secondly, Jacob is reminded in his vision that just as the angels ascend and descend that ladder, so too do human beings. We have our peaks and valleys in our lives, and this is the way of the world. But Jacob is also reminded that God does not remain in one place, only present for us when we are at our best and brightest and most peaceful. God travels with us up and down the ladder of our lives. We never need to feel alone. And it was this sense of presence that calmed Jacob when he woke. Despite his mistakes and his misfortunes and his confusion and his sense of sadness and loss, he did not, and we do not, walk alone. Jacob sanctifies this spot of his deepest loneliness and sadness. He understands that it is a holy place, a transformative place. He names it and he blesses it for what it can help him to become. And this is also an act of resilience that we can engage in ourselves. We do not seek out misfortune and hardship in Judaism, and we do not glorify it. But we can acknowledge that it is something that shapes us and refines us and builds us. And this transformation can be a source of blessing in our lives, even as we might find it painful. Challenge builds us. This is also the way of the world. Finally, Jacob vows to return to this rock. He understands that this moment in his life, however painful, is a source of learning. And he vows not to reject it, but to embrace it as a part of him, to incorporate it into his journey. And this is so important for us as human beings as well. Each challenging situation we encounter must be somehow incorporated into our story. We must learn to carry it, even as we progress. We do not live in these dark places, but they are on the map of our lives. And it is grounding for us, as it was for Jacob. When I think of our students in Knoxville, I think of their rock and their hard place and the way that this experience will affect their lives. They have had to sleep on it and have come to learn that it takes time for institutions to respond. And if that is disappointing, their voices of encouragement and their demands of accountability are vital. That is an important lesson that can only be learned through time. They have had to learn about the lowest and darkest impulses of human beings, and my heart breaks for them in this lesson. But hopefully they have felt the support of their community from afar as the hands of God. Our students have let this experience shape them. One graduate of Temple Israel High School, Jamie Marquis, wrote a powerful indictment of the leadership at the university for their lack of response, using a prophetic voice that the world sorely needs. And it makes us all proud to know that our students are speaking up in that way. And now twice, and God willing for the last time for a long while, these students have returned to this rock to paint over the hateful messages. And I suspect true friends have shown themselves during this difficult time. We will continue to support them as a Jewish community and as a human community. And even as we do, even as each of us faces our own hard places, we can remember what we learned from Jacob's experience. When we are alone in that place, when we are pressed from all sides, what emerges is the most essential part of us. We become strong in those places. We become courageous in those places. We become more loving and empathetic in those places if we let ourselves, as Jacob did. And perhaps this is the reason for Jacob's declaration as he looks at his rock. God was in this place, and I did not know it. May we each find God's presence in the most difficult of circumstances in our lives. That is our heritage, our Torah tells us, and God willing, that is our legacy as well. Shabbat shalom.